Okay, so I have to tell you, chicken soup, is it an old wives' tale? Well, it's actually been shown to have an anti-inflammatory effect, but it may be less about the chicken and more about the vegetables in the soup. So you could have vegetable broth with vegetables in it and probably have the same effect. Hydration is important. Most people are dehydrated to start with, and then they get sick with something like the flu, and that may cause them to become even more dehydrated because of fever, vomiting, or diarrhea. And you have to be very careful to avoid diuretic-inducing beverages like coffee, tea, colas, that sort of thing. Drinking fluids will actually help to reduce discomfort. It will help move waste out of the body. And it's sometimes the reason why people have a headache, even when they're not sick, is because they're dehydrated. By the way, when the body is dehydrated, histamine production increases, which it leads to increased mucus, the allergic response of your immune system. And by the way, when people are really sick, a lot of times just water, juices, and vegetable broth are well tolerated. Sometimes a smoothie would be okay. But again, some weight loss is normal, and I'm less concerned about that than I am just the person not having to be hospitalized. All right, so the first person who said all disease begins in the gut was Hippocrates. So it's not like we haven't known about it for a long time. He lived a long time ago. So I'll be real specific about gut microbiome and immune function and SARS-CoV-2. We are colonized as humans by enormous numbers of microbes. We call them the commensal microbiota. Most of them are in the gastrointestinal tract, but we've got bacteria. We live in a soupy mess of bacteria. In fact, there's more bacterial and viral cells than there are human cells involved in the creation of a human being. These commensal cells play a huge role in the development and function of the immune system through signaling. They don't generally leave the gut, for example. But again, I'll compare to the thermostat. The thermostat's in my living room and the furnace is downstairs, but it's the regulatory system, right? So if you end up disrupting this microbiota because you take antibiotics and you've never repaired it, or because you eat a terrible diet that preferentially feeds the pathogen, you're more susceptible to ill health. The adaptive immune system in the intestine is regulated by this bacteria. So all that elaborate explanation I gave you before about the adaptive immune system creating molecules that are specific to the pathogens, all of that gets interrupted if you mess up your gut microbiome. The commensal bacteria network with immune cells throughout the body. And antibiotic-treated mice shows severe bronchial epithelial degeneration and increased risk of death after infection with influenza virus. And by the way, I'm not telling you not to take an antibiotic if you have a severe bacterial infection, but they are so overprescribed. I could do another 2-hour lecture just on the overprescribing of antibiotics. They're good when you need them, but we are really overusing them. If you do have to take an antibiotic, and we've all had, most people my age have had to do it a couple of times, then you restore your microbiome with probiotics. The gut microbiome is protective against respiratory infections. Depletion or lack of commensal bacteria in mice diminishes the immune response and worsens outcomes. And a review of 49 studies showed that commensal bacteria are involved in response to local and systemic infections, right? So this is something you can do and fix before, do something about and fix before flu season. The solution, probiotics, shown to enhance innate immunity, especially phagocytosis and natural killer cells. Individuals taking probiotics have improved response to vaccinations when they get them, and probiotics have been shown to increase antibody response to vaccination for seasonal flu in adults. A meta-analysis of 20 randomized controlled trials. Taking probiotics reduced the number of days of illness, fewer days absent from daycare, school, or work. A Cochrane review, probiotics were better than placebo in preventing acute upper respiratory infections and reducing antibiotic use. A review of 14 randomized controlled trials, prophylactic use of probiotics reduced the incidence and duration of upper respiratory tract infections in healthy children. A meta-analysis of 23 trials, over 6,200 kids aged newborn to 18 years, probiotics significantly reduced the incidence of respiratory tract infection. They had fewer number of days with RTI than those taking placebo and fewer missed days from daycare or school. Damage to the gut microbiome, especially lower levels of lactobacilli and bifidobacteria found in 19 patients. That led to higher concentration of opportunistic pathogens, which persisted after resolution of COVID-19. You've heard of long COVID. A person who's compromised and then gets COVID can end up with long COVID because the original problem's never been fixed, right? Concentration of pathogens was associated with COVID-19 severity, and concentration of commensals was associated, the good bacteria associated with less severe COVID-19. This is how you explain why some people, I am positive that I must have been infected with COVID at some point. I never stopped being around people, and just flu season, you're infected, most of us get exposed to everything. No symptoms. Why? Well, because I've spent the last 30 years of my life really focusing on my health, which doesn't guarantee I'm never going to get sick. But it does guarantee it's going to be less likely and it's going to be less impactful if I do. A study published in April of 2020, 20% of patients with confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection had gastrointestinal symptoms. 2/3 shed viral DNA and RNA in their feces. Over 60% of patients continued to shed RNA in their feces even after a PCR test showed negative. Patients with dysbiosis have worse outcomes and longer recovery times from COVID-19 than those who have healthier microbiomes, but you can expand it beyond just COVID. It's the topic of the moment, but any viral infection. Researchers in Hong Kong analyzed the microbiomes of 15 patients who tested positive. They examined 2 to 3 fecal samples each week until the patients were discharged from the hospital. At that time, anybody who tested positive was hospitalized. All the patients had increased levels of pathogenic bacteria and reduced levels of beneficial bacteria as compared to healthy controls. Those who were treated with antibiotics were in even worse shape. The degree of dysbiosis was directly related to the severity of symptoms. All right. So the condition of your microbiome is directly related to your propensity to get disease, how severe it's going to be, how well you're going to recover. A study of 100 patients confirmed what I just showed you. Also reported that higher levels of pathogens were associated with higher levels of inflammatory cytokines. Follow-up with these patients showed a link between a damaged gut microbiome and persistent symptoms, sometimes referred to as long COVID. On the other hand, people who completely recovered had a microbiome similar to people who were never infected, right? It just, the evidence adds up and adds up. Here's another thing. SARS-CoV-2 has an affinity for ACE2 receptors, which are found throughout the human body, including in the mucosal lining of the human gut, which tells you the connection between what I'm saying here. ACE2 receptors play a role in regulating the microbiome, and infection interferes with the regulatory system. Dysbiosis can increase the risk of symptomatic infection, and that can exacerbate the dysbiosis. So you get this like negative feedback loop from hell, where it just gets worse and worse and worse unless you do something to turn it around and bring it back the other direction. So the same research group analyzed 101 stool samples from human COVID-19 patients. The samples showed significant dysbiosis with blooms of opportunistic pathogenic bacteria and antibiotic-resistant bacteria in those who were hospitalized. So you take a look at who gets sick and how sick they get, and what are your risk factors and how can you fix them, which is the message I'm trying to give you here. And this goes back to what I said before. Everybody knows right now. Everybody knows people who are diabetic, obese, high blood pressure, at higher risk of COVID, and they are also more likely to have compromised gut microbiomes, in part because the drugs they take and the diets they eat to get into this condition mess up the gut microbiome. So if infected and with symptoms, taking a probiotic during illness may actually be helpful. A pilot study involving 25 COVID patients given probiotics showed that they had higher levels of beneficial bacteria, lower levels of inflammatory markers, more likely to recover fully than 30 controls who were given the usual care with no probiotics. And of course, change the diet. Because even if you take probiotics, if you're going to continue to preferentially feed the pathogens with protein and fat instead of fiber and carbohydrate, you're not going to have long-lasting health. Patients treated for COVID with a combination of drugs or the same drugs plus probiotics, they all had fever, they all required non-invasive oxygen, they all had lung involvement. The two groups were comparable in age, sex, lab values, comorbidities, mode of oxygen support. Within 72 hours, almost all patients treated with probiotics have relief from diarrhea. less than half of the non-probiotic group. The risk of respiratory failure was 8-fold lower in patients taking probiotics. And nobody's talking about this, but it's something that you can do. These are over-the-counter products that you can purchase. You don't even need a prescription, right? So just a little word about supplements to finish this up here, and then I'll be happy to take some questions. So Dr. Zelenko's home treatment for COVID-19 is worth considering. Obviously, with severe illness, this may not be the great idea, but I'll just mention it here. You can buy it online. It does not require a prescription. Arginine for COVID-19. This is a very interesting study that was performed in Italy. Endothelium is a target for SARS-CoV-2 because of the ACE2 receptors. A double-blind arginine has been shown to improve endothelial function. And by the way, you can consume it in foods, so you don't have to take it supplementally. However, in this particular case, a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, patients hospitalized with severe COVID-19 in Italy, 101 patients at 10 days, 71.1% in the arginine group had respiratory symptoms reduced, 44% in the placebo arm. And the difference in hospital stays was highly significant, right? So I don't normally recommend that people take arginine on a daily basis because I think that you can keep your endothelial tissue in really great shape by eating a great diet and staying hydrated, taking good care of yourself. But again, in the event of a respiratory illness of any type, including COVID-19, but not limited to that, you can use arginine perhaps as a helper. Green tea, second most consumed beverage worldwide after water. It's the main beverage in countries like China and Japan. And all tea is derived from the leaves of the same plant. Mainly, it's grown in China and Southeast Asia. But the type of tea, like white tea, green tea, black tea, is based on levels of oxidation and processing. White tea refers to the unopened buds found on the topmost part of the tea plant. And it's a process called withering. They take the moisture out under direct sunlight and drying, it finishes it up. Some claim the antioxidant value is higher, but it's really not yet ripe. So it's sort of like eating unripe vegetables, unripe tomatoes. You really want them vine ripened, right? Green tea is more ripe. It's harvested after the buds are open. It's dried and should retain its green color if it's really high quality stuff. Oolong is fresh leaves that stand for about an hour before they're heat treated. And it's an intermediate stage of oxidation between the green and the black tea. And then black tea is highly processed and oxidized. And the only reason I'm going through this little tea primer here is that if you were to decide to consume green tea on a regular basis or in response to being sick, you want to make sure it's really, really good, high quality green tea. It's not black tea and white tea. It's green tea that is known to have the effect. And where the effect comes from is polyphenols, which they're also known as catechins. They're antioxidants in green tea that have anti-tumor, antioxidant, antimicrobial activities. And EGCG is one of the 5 types of catechins, which comprises about 59% of the total polyphenols in green tea leaves. It's a main active constituent. And then there are several others as well. But here's what the real important part is here. Catechins are the flavonoids in green tea. And in a study in Japan, 2,273 healthcare workers were randomized to consume a drink containing catechins, EGCG, or a smaller amount of 5 other catechins a day, or 3 times a day, or placebo. And the high dose group was if you wanted to put it in equivalent terms, they were getting the equivalent of like a cup of green tea every day. And the incidence of acute infections was 26.7% in the placebo group, 29.2% in the low dose group, and 13.1% in the high dose green tea group. And that's profound. It's like 50% reduction. So I want to be crystal clear here. I'm not proposing that green tea has magical properties. And if you stay overweight and hypertensive and diabetic and you eat a keto diet, all you got to do is just, well, I'll even take more green tea. I'll have 3 cups instead of 1 cup, and I'll just reverse all of that. I'm not saying that. I think it's a combination of things that you do to build health. And this is one of those tools in the combination. Like when I was talking about food as medicine and looking at it as, the grocery store as the drug store, This is one of the drugs I use on a regular basis. I don't take any drugs unless I absolutely have to, but this is one of the healthy drugs I take every day. Green tea catechins have demonstrated antiviral effects on all kinds of human viruses, all of them, right? And here are the references. So again, it's not magical stuff. You can't keep doing all the rest of the bad things that you do and just hope this will rescue you. But the more good things you do, the healthier you get. And I don't know about you, but with few limitations, I'm willing to spend a lot of effort building my health every day so that I don't have to spend a lot of effort dealing with the not building my health every day. And just a comment I'll make, this comes up all the time in my line of work. People will just, it's like, Pam, the stuff that you do takes time. It takes less time than you might imagine once you have your whole life set up to do it. I mean, I do exercise almost every day. I eat optimal food. I batch cook every week. I stay hydrated, sitting here with my glass of water. And I make sure that I sleep like a baby because I wear myself out. And I have a great life. I really have had the privilege of living a spectacular life. But the point is, when people tell me they don't have time to do what I'm doing, I ask them, how are you going to have time to be sick? Because the people who have cancer that I work with, they don't have time to do anything but that. I don't know about you. I'd rather spend less amount of time every day doing what I do so that I'm not sick all the time and something serious doesn't happen, or at least I reduce my risk as much as possible, than I would to avoid all of this time and energy that I put into it now, and then it becomes a full-time job just to survive later. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. All right, a study of 2,663 school children in Japan, 1 to 5 cups of green tea per day reduced influenza infection. Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study of healthy adults 18 to 70 years of age. The subjects were randomized to take green tea capsules versus placebo. The intervention group, 32.1% fewer subjects with symptoms, 22.9% fewer overall illnesses, 35.6% fewer symptom days compared to placebo. Personally, I don't think green tea capsules is what you want. I think you want the actual leaves themselves. I actually put the leaves in my smoothie every day. In vitro studies, which aren't really as good as human studies, I've shown you some of those, but they show the same thing. Green tea extracts inactivate SARS-CoV-2 in vitro in a dose-dependent manner. And so the more healthy things you do, the healthier you get, the less likely you are to get disease, and the more likely you are to recover quickly if you have it. You cannot go through life thinking that you're somehow going to avoid getting sick. And remember what I said earlier, we should not get panicked about children getting sick. They will have no immune system developed if we try to keep them from getting sick, right? And there is no such thing as a human body that goes through life without ever getting a cold or something. But what you want to do is make it a non-event. That's the key. You want to make sickness rare and uneventful when and if it happens. All right, so this is really interesting. There are very few supplements that we have great studies on. Green tea happens to be one of them, by the way, and it's a food, not necessarily a supplement. But elderberry is one of them. First of all, historically, it's been used for a long time. Elderberry has been used for centuries for a lot of different things. The Native Americans used it for fever and rheumatism. It's also been used to treat stomach ache, sinus congestion, constipation, diarrhea, sore throat, and the common cold. It's considered one of Germany's most important medicinal plants. And the only reason I mention that is that the German government made a decision many years ago to not endorse just one system of medicine like we do here in the United States. It's just all allopathic medicine, and everything else is kind of marginalized or even disallowed. But Germany, it's highly prescribed there, and it's used in Ayurvedic medicine as well. One of the reasons we have good data on elderberry is that an Israeli company actually patented an elderberry product many, many years ago. It's called Sambucol. You can buy elderberry products in a lot of different places, though, and we're really lucky here in Columbus because Trish's Elderberries, which is a nationally known brand, is located here in Columbus, and we were really happy to incubate her. We allowed her to use our kitchen for a period of time until she had her own. And so we got introduced to elderberry. We carry it in our store. But in any case, meta-analysis of 4 randomized trials with 180 patients, black elderberry was effective for colds and flu, reducing upper respiratory symptoms. Test tube studies, standardized elderberry extract has been shown to reduce replication of human influenza viruses type A and B and H1N1. Double-blind placebo-controlled study of residents of a kibbutz during an outbreak of flu, Zambacol, significantly better than placebo. Fever improved in 93.3% of subjects taking Zambacol in 2 days. In the control group, it was 6 days, right? And so within 2 to 3 days, almost 90% of those taking Zambacol, that's the product that was patented initially, achieved complete cure. It took 6 days in the placebo group. That's a significant difference. So it's one of the few things that I have. I really think that we've got to get people eating food, not necessarily taking supplements all the time instead of eating good food. And it's one of the few things that I have in my medicine cabinet all the time.